an anonymous post on a message board that knew Jeffrey Epstein was dead before the public did. A building on his private island that looks like nothing else on the property, with an official blueprint that quietly calls it a music room. A hidden camera, taped inside a tissue box. A private ranch where he told the people around him he wanted to father a generation of children who carried his DNA. Photographs from inside his island mansion that the public was never supposed to see. Every one of those is real and documented. What they actually prove is a different question. Over the next few minutes, 5 of the strangest, most argued-over details buried inside the Epstein files. And for each one, we're separating what investigators actually proved from what the internet decided on its own. By 2026, the United States Department of Justice said it had released nearly 3.5 million pages connected to Jeffrey Epstein, along with more than 2,000 videos and roughly 180,000 images. And somehow, the case only became harder to understand. Because buried inside those files are genuine court records, photographs, emails, evidence inventories, and investigative documents. But mixed around them are rumors, anonymous tips, internet theories, and claims that were never proven. So for this video, we're doing something different. 5 cases. 5 of the strangest parts of the Epstein story. And every time the internet takes the evidence somewhere darker, we're going to separate what is documented from what is still speculation. This video discusses sexual abuse and exploitation. Viewer discretion is advised. This is the disturbing Epstein files explained. Case 1, the 4chan post. August 10, 2019. Jeffrey Epstein was being held inside the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan while awaiting trial on federal sex trafficking charges. Then, at 8:16 that morning, an anonymous message appeared on 4chan. The user claimed Epstein had died from hanging and cardiac arrest. At the time, the public didn't know that. The first major public report came roughly 38 minutes later. And suddenly, what looked like another anonymous internet post became something investigators actually had to explain. The details were strange enough that people immediately wondered whether the poster worked at the prison, in law enforcement, or in emergency medicine. The user appeared comfortable using medical terminology and continued answering questions from other people on the board. Then the story became even stranger. The same poster began suggesting that Epstein's body may have been switched after being removed from the facility. That part has never been verified. There is no established evidence that Epstein escaped, that a body double replaced him, or that the person found in the cell was anyone other than Epstein. But the early post itself was real enough to attract federal attention. Documents released years later showed that investigators subpoenaed 4chan just 4 days after Epstein's death. The company provided IP information connected to the posts. Investigators then tried to trace those addresses through telecommunications companies. The trail went cold. One provider reportedly could not connect the dynamic IP information to a specific customer, and prosecutors later acknowledged that they had never identified the author. That leaves a much narrower mystery than the internet usually tells. Not, did Epstein secretly escape? But, who knew he was dead before the story became public? And how did that information reach an anonymous 4chan account? The official investigations into Epstein's death concluded that he died by suicide. The Justice Department Inspector General later documented serious failures inside the jail, including staff misconduct, mischecks, staffing problems, and the fact that Epstein was left alone for hours. Those failures help explain why his death generated so much suspicion. But they still don't tell us who made that post. That mystery starts with an anonymous account and ends at a dead end. The next one starts with a building everyone can see, and a purpose nobody has ever confirmed. Case 2. What was the building on Epstein's island? If you've ever seen an aerial photograph of Little St. James, one structure is almost impossible to miss. A blue and white striped building with a dome, sitting high above the water. Online, it became known simply as the Temple. And over the years, people have attached almost every imaginable theory to it. Secret rituals, underground rooms, hidden meetings, a bunker, place designed to conceal crimes. But when you look at the actual planning documents, the first surprise is how ordinary the official description sounds. A 2010 development package for Little St. James described a proposed structure on the southwestern end of the island as a music room or music pavilion. The plans described a single room of about 3,500 square feet, positioned high above the coastline and reached by a narrow trail. On paper, nothing about it sounds like an underground prison or a ritual chamber. But the structure that appeared on the island became visually bizarre enough to guarantee speculation. Its striped exterior, gold-colored dome and unusual architecture looked completely unlike the rest of the property. More recent reporting based on Epstein's communications and people involved in the project suggests he personally drew inspiration from Islamic architecture and at times referred to the design in mosque-like terms. That explains at least part of the strange appearance. What it does not give us is a definitive record of exactly how Epstein used the finished building day to day. And that's where the internet filled in the blanks. Photographs became diagrams. Diagrams became theories. And eventually, claims about tunnels, rituals, and secret containment rooms were repeated as though investigators had proved them. They hadn't. The strongest real evidence is much simpler. The building existed, its official planning documents described a music space, its final appearance was unusual, and its exact use has never been publicly documented in enough detail to satisfy the people studying it online. Sometimes a mystery survives not because there is proof of something extraordinary inside it, but because the evidence stops at the door. A structure with an official blueprint and an unofficial reputation that outgrew it. The next case doesn't need the internet to invent anything. This time, Epstein put the request in writing himself. Case 3. The cameras, the hard drives, and the blackmail theory. This may be the most important rabbit hole in the entire case. For years, one theory has followed Epstein more than almost any other. That his properties were filled with hidden cameras, and that he recorded powerful visitors so he could control them later. The second part, a systematic blackmail operation, has never been proven. But the cameras are not just an internet invention. Material released in 2026 added something extremely concrete. An email exchange from 2014 showed Epstein asking for motion-activated hidden cameras at his Palm Beach home. A staff member responded that cameras had already been purchased and were being concealed inside tissue boxes. Then came something even harder to dismiss. Among the massive Justice Department release were grainy video clips that appeared to have been recorded from a concealed camera inside Epstein's Palm Beach office. So the question is no longer whether Epstein ever used hidden recording equipment. There is documentary evidence that he did. The bigger question is what he recorded, why he recorded it, and what happened to the material. When federal agents searched Epstein's Manhattan residence in July 2019, they encountered a safe containing valuables and electronic media, including hard drives and disks. Because of the limits of the warrant being used at that moment, agents did not immediately seize everything inside. When investigators returned days later with additional authority, some of the contents were gone. That detail sounds almost designed for a conspiracy video. But later testimony provided a less dramatic explanation. The material had been moved after the search and was subsequently delivered to the FBI. Investigators were able to recover items from the safe. Still, the existence of cameras, electronic media, and recorded footage made the blackmail theory almost impossible for the internet to ignore. And this is where the distinction matters. Hidden surveillance is documented. A proven system for blackmailing prominent individuals is not. In a July 2025 memorandum, the Justice Department and FBI said an exhaustive review found no credible evidence that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals and no incriminating client list. That conclusion hasn't stopped people from asking where every recording went. And when millions of pages of evidence exist, but the public can only see fragments of the original surveillance system, unanswered questions become incredibly easy to fill with assumptions. A hidden camera is easy to prove. A blackmail ring is not, at least not according to the investigators who went looking for one. But cameras weren't the strangest idea Epstein is on record discussing. Case 4. Epstein's plan to seed the human race. The next case sounds like an internet rumor. It isn't. Years before the latest document releases, journalists reported that Epstein had repeatedly discussed an ambition to spread his own DNA by impregnating women at his massive ranch in New Mexico. The property was known as Zorro Ranch. Epstein's interest went beyond ordinary reproductive science. He surrounded himself with scientists and intellectuals and developed a fascination with genetics, artificial intelligence, transhumanism, and ideas associated with improving the human population through technology. According to people who heard him discuss the plan, Epstein imagined the New Mexico property becoming the center of a reproductive project involving his own genetic material. One account described a goal of having as many as 20 women pregnant at the same time. There is no evidence that this plan was actually carried out. That distinction is critical. The documented story is disturbing enough without inventing a secret breeding facility that investigators proved existed. What is documented is that Epstein talked about the idea to multiple people, that his interest in genetics and transhumanism was genuine, and that he had cultivated relationships with prominent researchers and institutions. The ranch itself has continued to attract attention long after his death. In 2026, New Mexico authorities reopened scrutiny of activities connected to the property as newly released federal material created fresh leads and renewed questions about what happened there. But even with that renewed investigation, the most sensational claims circulating online should not automatically be treated as fact. The reality is already strange enough. A wealthy convicted sex offender, discussing human genetic improvement with scientists while privately imagining a future in which large numbers of children would carry his DNA. Sounds like science fiction. And yet, the basic idea came from Epstein himself. A plan for a New Mexico ranch that, as far as the evidence shows, was never carried out. The next case isn't about what Epstein said he wanted. It's about what investigators finally let the public see for themselves.
Case 5. The rooms the files finally let us see. For years, Little St. James existed online mostly through distant aerial photographs. People could see the buildings. They couldn't see inside them. Then, in late 2025, congressional investigators released photographs and video obtained from authorities in the U.S. Virgin Islands. For the first time, the public got a much closer look at rooms on Epstein's private island. And some of the images were deeply strange. One room contained what appeared to be a dental chair positioned beneath a collection of face masks mounted along the walls. Another image showed a library-like room with chairs arranged near a large blackboard. Written across the board were words including power and deception, along with other fragments and markings. There were bedrooms, offices, hallways, phones, equipment, and ordinary living spaces mixed together with details that looked almost deliberately unsettling. And that's the problem with images like these. They invite interpretation before they provide context. A dental chair surrounded by masks looks disturbing. But a disturbing photograph is not automatically evidence of a crime committed in that room. A blackboard containing the word deception feels sinister when you already know who owned the island. But the word itself doesn't tell us why it was written there. The House committee that released the material said the images were part of its effort to provide transparency into Epstein's properties and activities. Separate productions from Epstein's estate eventually included tens of thousands of photographs, and congressional officials warned that many arrived with little or no context. That makes these files incredibly valuable and incredibly easy to misuse. Because once a photograph enters the internet, the caption underneath it can become more powerful than the evidence inside it. A strange room becomes a torture chamber. A decoration becomes a coded message. A photograph of two people becomes proof of a crime that the photograph itself does not show. And that may be the most important lesson hidden inside the Epstein files. The documents can reveal things we never knew. But they can also make rumors look official simply because the rumor is now sitting beside a government PDF. The disturbing part of the Epstein story isn't that the internet created conspiracy theories around it. It's that the confirmed story was already dark enough to make almost anything sound possible. A mysterious post that appeared before the news. A strange building on a private island. Hidden cameras that actually existed. A documented obsession with spreading his own DNA. And thousands of photographs that still arrive without enough context to explain what we're looking at. Some theories collapse when you examine the evidence. Others survive because the evidence ends before the questions do. And after millions of pages, videos, photographs, and years of investigations, one question still hangs over the entire case. How much of the full story Do we actually know? If you want more investigations into the internet's darkest rabbit holes, subscribe to Buried Online, because there's always something else buried beneath the surface.